We thought it would be the perfect escape. Sun, waves, and the endless horizon of open ocean stretching before us. Just four friends looking for a bit of freedom from the noise of the world. It was supposed to be simple: rent a boat, sail for a few days, maybe find some hidden beach or uninhabited island to call our own for a while. I remember how we laughed, how light everything felt as the wind carried us toward the unknown. But all of that changed the moment the storm hit. It came out of nowhere. One moment, the sky was a brilliant blue, and the next, it was consumed by heavy, roiling clouds. The waves grew monstrous, tossing our small boat like a toy in a bathtub. Panic set in fast, but there was nothing we could do. The storm had us, and no amount of skill or effort could fight the fury of the ocean. We were helpless. I clung to the side of the boat as the wind screamed around us, the rain lashing like needles against my skin. Then I heard the crack the boat had split. Everything after that was chaos. I don't know how long we were in the water. It felt like hours, maybe more, drifting in and out of consciousness, struggling to stay afloat. I kept thinking I was going to drown, that the ocean would swallow me whole. But when I woke up, I wasn't in the water anymore. My body ached from head to toe, my throat raw from sea water. I was lying on a beach, face down in the sand, and the sound of crashing waves filled the air. That's when I realized we had washed ashore. The others were there too. Jenny was closest to me, coughing and gasping for air. Mark and Tyler were further down the beach, motionless at first, but eventually they stirred. We were alive. The storm had spat us out onto this strange island, but for a brief moment we felt relief. We weren't dead. We hadn't been lost to the sea. I thought maybe we had been saved, but that was before we realized where we were. The island was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. At first glance, it seemed like any other tropical island-dense jungle, swaying palm trees, the sound of waves crashing against the shore. But the more we looked around, the more unsettled we became. There was something off about the silence. It was too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just an eerie stillness that pressed down on us like a weight. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We were too exhausted to think clearly, though. We had just survived a storm. Our boat was in pieces, and we had no idea where we were. The first thing we had to do was gather ourselves, find shelter, and figure out what came next. Tyler was the one who suggested we move inland, toward the jungle. He thought we might find fresh water there, maybe even food. It seemed like the best option at the time. But looking back, I wish we had never set foot in those trees. The jungle was thick, the vegetation unlike anything I had ever seen. Huge, twisting roots tangled together beneath our feet, while strange, oversized leaves blocked out the sky above. The deeper we went, the darker it got, the air heavy with humidity. It wasn't long before we found the first signs that we weren't alone. Old stone structures, half buried beneath vines and moss, stood like forgotten sentinels in the shadows. Ruins, ancient, crumbling buildings that seemed out of place in this wild, overgrown place. Who had built them? And why had they been abandoned? At first, we were fascinated. We had stumbled upon something incredible, something no one else had likely seen in centuries. Tyler, ever the optimist, thought it might be a lost civilization, that we could uncover some long-forgotten history. Mark, however, was less enthused. He didn't say much, but I could see the unease in his eyes. Something about the ruins didn't sit right with him. And as the day wore on, that feeling spread to the rest of us. It wasn't just the ruins. There were strange markings on the trees, symbols carved deep into the bark, some faded with age, others more recent. They didn't look like any language I recognized, more like crude drawings, symbols of what? I couldn't say, but they made me nervous. We pressed on, hoping to find water. But the further we went, the more the island seemed to twist around us. It felt like we were walking in circles, even though we were sure we had been going straight. Then, the first strange thing happened. We heard something, a whisper, low and indistinct, coming from deep within the jungle. We stopped in our tracks, looking at one another, trying to figure out where it was coming from. But the sound seemed to move, slipping between the trees, always just out of reach. It was like the island itself was speaking, but in a language none of us could understand. We chalked it up to the wind at first, but deep down, I think we all knew better. As night began to fall, we realized we needed to stop, set up some kind of camp before it got too dark. We had nothing with us, no food, no supplies, but we gathered what we could, pulling together makeshift beds from leaves and branches. The ruins loomed nearby, casting long, eerie shadows in the fading light. It was unsettling, being so close to something so old, so mysterious. But we didn't have much choice. We huddled together, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that had settled over us. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard something footsteps, rustling in the bushes, the soft murmur of voices that shouldn't have been there. I wasn't the only one. Jenny sat up at one point, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. We all had, but none of us wanted to admit it. There was something out there, watching us, waiting, and we had no idea what it was. Morning came, but the fear didn't fade with the daylight. If anything, it got worse. Tyler was the first to suggest we explore the ruins, hoping to find some clue about the island, some explanation for the strange things we had seen and heard. I wasn't so sure. Every instinct in my body told me to stay away from those ancient structures. But we didn't have many options. We needed answers. So, we gathered our courage and headed deeper into the heart of the ruins. The air inside the ruins was thick and oppressive, the walls cold and damp to the touch. It felt like the very stones were watching us, waiting for something. As we moved through the narrow corridors, the symbols we had seen on the trees began to appear on the walls, more elaborate and detailed the further we went. They told a story, I think, though none of us could make sense of it. It was clear that whoever had built this place had worshipped something dark and powerful. We reached the center of the ruins, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. There, in the middle of the courtyard, stood a large stone altar, worn with age but still imposing. It was covered in more symbols, these fresher than the others, as though someone had been here recently, maintaining it. A chill ran down my spine as we stood there staring at the altar. None of us wanted to get too close, but Tyler, ever curious, stepped forward. That's when it happened. The wind picked up suddenly, howling through the trees, and the jungle came alive with sound. The whispers we had heard before were louder now, almost deafening. The ground seemed to tremble beneath our feet, and I swear, for a moment, I saw something moving in the shadows beyond the altar. Tyler froze, his eyes wide with fear. "Well, we need to go," Mark said, his voice shaking. And for the first time, none of us argued. We ran. We didn't know where we were going, but we ran anyway, desperate to get away from that place, from whatever was lurking in the darkness. The jungle seemed to close in around us, the trees twisting and bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded, that the island itself was leading us somewhere. And then we heard it, a low guttural growl, not far behind us. We didn't stop to look back. We kept running, our hearts pounding in our chests, our breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how far we went, the growling stayed close, always just out of sight. The sun had set completely by then, and the jungle was pitch black. I could barely see the others, could barely hear their footsteps over the sound of my own fear. And then, Just when I thought we couldn't go any further, we stumbled into another clearing. It was the last place I wanted to be. Another set of ruins, smaller than the first, but no less ominous. In the center of the clearing was another altar, almost identical to the one we had just fled. And standing there waiting for us was something I still can't explain. A figure, tall and shadowed, its face obscured by darkness. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its presence, heavy and oppressive. We froze, too terrified to move. The growling had stopped. The jungle was silent once again, but that didn't bring any comfort. The figure stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and I could feel my pulse racing, my body locked in place by fear. It was coming for us. I knew it. We all did. Tyler was the first to snap out of it, grabbing Jenny's hand and pulling her back toward the trees. Mark and I followed, not daring to look back as we fled once again. This time we didn't stop until we reached the beach. We collapsed onto the sand, gasping for air, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. But the worst part was the realization that there was no escape. The boat was gone, shattered by the storm. We were trapped on this island, with no way off and no way to call for help. And whatever was out there in the jungle, it wasn't going to let us leave. We spent the night huddled together on the beach, staring out at the dark ocean. The whispers returned, carried on the wind, but they were fainter now, as though the island was watching us, waiting for something. None of us slept. We couldn't. Every sound, every rustle of leaves or crashing wave sent a jolt of fear through my body. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I knew deep down that we weren't going to survive this place. The next day, we tried to come up with a plan. Tyler wanted to head back into the jungle, to try and find some way to signal for help, but none of us were willing to go back, not after what we had seen. So, we stayed on the beach, gathering what little we could from the wreckage of the boat, hoping that maybe, just maybe, a passing ship would see us. But hours turned into days, and no help came. The island began to wear us down. Mark was the first to break. He stopped speaking, stopped responding to us altogether. He just sat there, staring blankly out at the water, as though waiting for something. Jenny wasn't far behind. She started hearing voices, whispering in her ear even when there was no wind. She said they were telling her things, dark things. Things I didn't want to believe, but I could see the truth in her eyes. She was slipping away from us. Tyler and I did our best to keep it together, to stay focused on survival, but it was becoming harder with each passing day. The island was alive, I was sure of it. It was watching us, toying with us, feeding off our fear. And the longer we stayed, the more it got under our skin. I started having nightmares, vivid and terrifying, of the figure we had seen in the jungle. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, standing there, waiting. Then, one morning, Mark was gone. We woke up to find his spot on the beach empty, his belongings scattered in the sand. There were no footprints, no sign of struggle. He had simply vanished. Tyler wanted to go looking for him, but I knew it was pointless. The island had taken him, just like it was taking all of us. I tried to tell Tyler that, but he wouldn't listen. He was determined to find Mark, to bring him back. Tyler never came back. He disappeared into the jungle that afternoon, and I never saw him again. I waited for hours, calling his name, hoping he would come back with some sign of hope. But deep down, I knew the truth. The island had claimed him too. And now it was just Jenny and me, alone on the beach, with no one left to help us. Jenny was barely holding on by that point. The voices were getting louder, more insistent. She kept telling me that the island wanted something from us, that it wouldn't let us leave until we gave it what it wanted. I didn't understand, didn't want to understand. But the look in her eyes told me everything. She had given up. She was ready to let the island take her too. And then, just like the others, she was gone. I was alone. Completely and utterly alone on this cursed island. The days blurred together, each one more oppressive than the last. I stopped trying to fight it, stopped trying to find a way off. The island had won. It had taken everything from me. And as the sun began to set, casting the jungle in deep, blood-red shadows, I realized that it was my turn. I could feel it, the weight of the island pressing down on me, the whispers growing louder, closer. I don't know how much time has passed since then. The days are endless, the nights even longer. But the island, it's always there watching, waiting. I can feel it in my bones, in the very air I breathe. It won't let me go. It never intended to. As the sun sets for what feels like the final time, I can hear the whispers from the sea and the jungle converging, calling to me, drawing me in. Trapped, terrified, and with nowhere to run, I finally understand. The island never intended to let us leave. The realization hit me with a crushing weight. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was surrender. The island had taken everything. My friends, my hope, my will to fight. There was nothing left. I was alone, standing on the edge of the world, staring out at the endless sea, waiting for it to claim me. My legs trembled as I took a step forward, the sand beneath my feet cold and unwelcoming. I was a shadow of myself, barely recognizable, as if the island had drained me of everything I used to be. The whispers were louder now, swirling around me like a suffocating storm. I looked back at the jungle, its dark tendrils reaching out, beckoning me to return. It was strange how it called to me, how the fear that once paralyzed me now felt familiar. The trees whispered my name, each leaf rustling with secrets that I could almost understand. It felt as though the island had been waiting for me all along, as if I was always meant to end up here. A deep sadness gripped my heart, and tears spilled down my cheeks. How had it come to this? How had I lost everything I loved, everyone I cared about, to this cursed place? I dropped to my knees in the sand, sobbing uncontrollably. The pain was too much, the loneliness unbearable. My cries echoed across the shore, only to be swallowed by the ocean's roar. No one could hear me. No one was coming to save me. And yet, deep down, I knew there had never been a chance for rescue. This place, this island, it wasn't just a piece of land. It was alive, and it had chosen us. One by one, it had taken what it wanted. Now, it was waiting for me to finally give in. My heart felt heavy, the weight of grief almost too much to bear. I thought of Tyler, of Mark, of Jenny. Their faces flashed in my mind, each one etched with terror in those final moments. Did they find peace when the island took them? Or were they still out there somewhere, wandering the jungle like lost souls? I couldn't bear the thought. I couldn't bear the idea that they were still trapped in this nightmare, forever bound to the island's will. I whispered their names into the wind, hoping somehow they could hear me, hoping they knew how sorry I was that I couldn't save them. But the only response was the relentless whisper of the waves. The sun was sinking lower now, casting long shadows across the beach. My tears had dried, leaving me hollow inside. There was nothing left to fight for, nothing left to hope for. I had lost everything, except for the island's cruel embrace. I rose to my feet, shaky and weak, my body exhausted from days of running, of fear. I knew I couldn't run anymore. The jungle beckoned, the darkness deep and inviting. Maybe if I went back, if I gave myself to it willingly, the island would grant me some form of release. Maybe it would finally stop the torment. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the jungle. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the island itself was weighing me down, testing my resolve. My heart pounded in my chest, not from fear, but from the raw, overwhelming sadness of it all. I thought of home, of the life I had left behind. It felt so far away now, like a distant dream I could barely remember. My family, my friends, would they ever know what happened to us? Or would we simply become another forgotten story? Another mystery swallowed by the sea? As I entered the jungle, the whispers grew louder, closer, as if they were welcoming me back. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the fading light. I walked deeper and deeper, the air growing colder with each step. The shadows seemed to move, shifting in the corners of my vision. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had nothing left to lose. And then, as I reached the heart of the jungle, I saw it again. The figure. It stood there, tall and unmoving, its face still obscured by darkness. But this time I didn't freeze. I didn't run. I stepped closer, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The figure remained still, as though waiting for me. The air around me was thick with tension, the island's presence heavy and suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to keep moving. This was it. This was the moment it had all been leading to. As I approached the figure, I could feel the island's eyes on me, its gaze penetrating deep into my soul. And then, for the first time, the figure moved. It raised its hand slowly, deliberately, and pointed at me. A chill ran down my spine. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, the air vibrating with their intensity. I felt like I was on the edge of something unimaginable, something final. The figure stepped closer, and I could feel its breath cold and unnatural on my skin. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the cacophony of whispers. The figure didn't respond. It simply stood there, waiting, as though it was giving me a choice. But I didn't know what that choice was. I didn't know what it wanted from me. And I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. The figure took one last step forward, and everything around me fell silent. The jungle, the ocean, the wind, it all stopped, leaving me in an eerie, oppressive stillness. My heart hammered in my chest as the figure reached out and placed its hand on my shoulder. And in that moment I understood. The island had never been a prison. It was a test of will, of endurance, of survival. And I had failed. The island had claimed me, just as it had claimed the others. As the darkness closed in around me, I knew I would never leave. The island had won,